so much for joining us. For the next 40 minutes or so, Chad and I are going to demo some of our favorite use cases. We'll then introduce you to some Figmates who worked on this to sort of chat about what the team was and is thinking about moving forward. And we're also going to give a little bit of a sneak peek at how Figma uses branching internally. So to kick it off, Chad, do you want to show us how to create a branch? Walk us through the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look here. All right. So really the first thing with branching, of course, is how do we do with that? So here in our Figma organization, let's say I'm going to do some work on our shop view of our app here. And I don't want to disturb the existing design, but I'm going to now add in a size option and maybe make a couple of copy edits for some of the updates to this particular succulent. So I'm going to go up here right by the file name, and I'm going to drop down and click on Create Branch. Now, when you're creating a branch in Figma, if you have existing naming conventions that you use on your team, I'm always a big fan of carrying over some of those conventions. Let's say you have a Jira or Asana ticket, or maybe it's a assigned feature flag that you're working on. But for the sake of this, I'll just say it's like I have a ticket of UX 123 for this, and I'm going to put a little description of the work that is going to happen. New size for plant. So when I hit enter in my very, very descriptive branch there.
Love it. Love the branch name.
So here we're looking at our design. We notice that it is identical to our main file currently, but we have a branching icon here, which shows us that I'm now working in an isolated, really copy, if you will, of the file that is linked back to main. So here, let's actually do a little bit of work in our branch here and make these updates. Just so I can see what I'm doing, I'm going to expand my frame a little here. And Clara, I think we got two new sizes for this, right? We got a small and a medium size for the pot now. All right. So I'm going to reuse a little of what's already here in my auto layout container. And I'm just going to duplicate this drop down. And let's change this to say size. And let's default that to the small 8-inch one. Now, of course, we also want to make sure that this can be selected and have a menu come up. So I'm also going to use what I have here. I'm just going to duplicate my drop-down menu. And let's get rid of these two menu items here. We'll make this one a small 8-inch and this one a medium 12-inch. All right. We also want to make sure that we are making a copy update here, since there are two sizes available for it. So I'm just doing a little feature work that I would do right here in my branch to make these changes. And at any time, well, since I still have the tab open, I could switch right back over to that shop view, or I could also click on the name right up in the top here. And I can always still see that that main file is still existing in its current state. All of my changes I'm making are in my branch and local to what I'm working on right here. Now, let's change this a little bit here. So we're just going to have that open up this overlay. It's going to pop up. I think that everything is probably good on this. I've made the couple of changes that I needed to make, and I'm ready to get some feedback on this. Now, if you've shared files in Figma, it's really the same thing in a branch. So if I want to share this with a stakeholder for feedback, it could be, an internal stakeholder, or if I was working in an agency and I was creating these designs for a client, I could invite a client directly into this branch to see the work that is happening on it. So I'm going to hit my share button here. And we notice that we have an only people invited to this branch can access. We could also invite folks. I'm going to invite Clara to it here. But I could also copy the link. I could embed this branch right here. And then I could also change this to make it so anyone within the organization could discover this branch, be able to come into it. But since this is a new feature and I don't want to confuse folks on what's going on with the current or what's here, I'm going to invite Clara into it here. So I'm going to copy that link. I'm also going to send her the invite.
All right, I'm in here. Let's take a look.
Hello, Clara is already here. Got to do the obligatory cursor hello.
Exactly.
So Clara's able to take a look. Clara, I know we were adding those sizes. I put a little copy in here for the different 8 and 12 inch as well. If that all looks good, curious your thoughts on there.
Yeah, why don't we take a look at that prototyping view?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, things are looking good. And let's see what it looks like when we select some of those options. Yeah, nice. It actually looks like the hover state isn't quite correct. Why don't I take a closer look at the component library file, actually?
Yeah. And why don't we have you share, Clara, and show everyone what you see when you're invited into the branch?
Yes. So right now you'll see the prototyping view that we were just on. I also have access to that source file because Chad invited me. And looking through this, we're sort of teaming up on this design together. And after taking a look, I'm seeing, okay, the hover state is wrong. So why don't we go back into our mobile library, and I'm going to go ahead and make a contribution to that library through a branch. So I'm moving over to my mobile component library now, and you'll actually see that I have view only access. That's because I'm not an editor on the design system team. I'm just working on this feature with Chad, going through some of these components. Let's see. We've got a checkbox, a dropdown, and I'm thinking what I want to change is right over here. And what's really neat is it looks like we also have a contribution companion. And so even though I'm view only on the file, now I am an editor in this org instance, but I can still create a branch. And I think that's super cool because even as a viewer of a component library file, I'm still able to contribute back to the system and sort of make proposals. So I'm wanting to fix that hover state. So I'll go ahead and create a branch. I'm going to prefix this branch with a fix. And I'm going to call this update dropdown hover state. I'll go ahead and create that branch. And you'll see right now it's just duplicating that component library file. Before I fill out this form, which is just a bug fix, I'm going to go on over to our dropdown and then moving over to prototype mode. Now, a quick hotkey, if you want to toggle back and forth between your design and prototyping modes, you can hit Shift E, and let's inspect this noodle right here. So I don't want it while hovering, I want it while pressing. So you'll see we actually have that pressed state, but it's happening on hover. That's not happening on our iOS platform. So I'll click while pressing as my first change. And then I'll go back to this contribution companion guide and let's fill out some of these just so the design system team can have a little bit more context. So back to design mode, I'm going to hit that bug fix and then select check. We've set up all these checkboxes with components. I would say it's medium priority. And let's just include a little note here. Current dropdown had incorrect interactive state. All right, at this point, what I'm wanting to do is let the design system team know that I'm making this proposal. So I'm gonna hit that little caret, click review and merge changes. And you'll see I actually don't have the ability to merge those changes because again, I'm just a viewer. So I know some folks on the design system team and Figma's already suggesting some people who are editors on that library file. So I'm just gonna add Chad, I'm gonna add Tom, and then just include a little description as a proposal. I noticed the noodles weren't connecting correctly on the dropdown. Please take a look. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and request that review. Boom. And you'll see now that this branch is now affixed with this little tag that says in review. So I'll pass it back to Chad to take a look at my review.
Awesome. So what we will notice here is once I'm in Figma here, I can look at my notifications and it's telling me that there's a request. So I can click on this in my notifications and it will take me directly in to that branch. And here I can see that Clara has requested this review. The handles weren't connecting properly. If I want additional information beyond what's right here, I can easily take a look at the contribution companion and that she has completed. So I can see what's been changed on there. I can also go in and see that it was the menu item that was updated. So with the prototyping, we wouldn't see a visual change here. So I would actually have to go into the file itself here. And I can come over, take a look in the branch, and I can take a look at that noodle and see, okay, it is while pressing. Where if I'm not sure, I could easily go back here into the main and take a look at that as well. So here I can see it is while hovering. So it was a great catch that Clara had here, and she was able to propose this update. So I can bring up that review again. And since everything looks good, if you have process in place in your organization where maybe you require multiple approvals before things are merged, that can be handy in having multiple reviewers selected. So I could just hit approve and we could wait for Tom's approval on this as well. Or since this is such a minor change that is not going to be a big visual impact or it's very focused in the update, I'm going to go ahead and just merge that right in. So once that's merged in, we can see we're back in our main file here and we have that change. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this out. Typically we would put the description, probably give Clara a shout out for the contribution, but just for the sake of our time today, I'm just going to hit publish and live on the edge.
I also got a notification on my end that the branch was approved. Fastest branch turnaround ever. So thanks so much, Chad.
So now let's take a look because that update is obviously going to impact what happened in the work that we're doing in our shop views main file, as well as here in our branch. So I can see that there's component updates available. I could accept these here in the branch first, but let's say I'm not in the branch yet and I'm still in the main file. I'm going to take a look at that change and I can see these were updated. It has the note that was on Clara's merge request. So I'm going to update those. And then we'll take a look here in our branch. Now let's say I'm going to go and merge this and I did not accept the changes. I'm now going to go and review and merge these changes. And we can see I get a notice at the top of the window here that there's updates available for the branch. Now, in this case, I can still merge it without updating because there's not a direct conflict. So the changes to the component, I don't have to have those accepted in here right now. Or if I'd like to, I can still bring those updates in from the main file. I always am a fan of making sure I have the most recent updates when I merge it back in. So I'm just going to apply those changes. Now I'm going to go in and merge my changes once again to end up merging and archiving this branch. So since we have the visual changes here, we can see in the side by side, it's a little bit different here. We can do an overlay and we can scrub between to see what has changed. So we have the additional copy here. If we were to scroll down, we would have that additional input we added. So everything is good. Since I am an editor, I don't have to request a review. This is my feature file that I'm working on. So I'm just going to merge that. And now we saw in the main here, we now have that updated drop-down menu. And if we expand this down, we can also see we have that updated size as well.
Looking good, Chad.
Awesome. So that's just a few of the most common use cases that we've seen teams use branching for so far since coming out of beta. If you've found some great use cases for it on your teams, let us know in the chat how you're using branching. It'd be awesome to see. All right. Now, we can't wait to introduce you to our speakers. And we're going to dive in to learn a bit more about how branching in Figma came to be. So today we have 3 of our Figmates who worked on branching with us today. So I'd like everyone to give a nice warm welcome to Shana Hu, one of our product designers, John Fuetsch, one of our software engineers, and Nilsson, one of our product designers. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And just as a little welcome, wondering if you could each tell us just one boring fact about yourselves. Shana, would you be up to answer first?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Shana. I'm a product designer here. And my favorite drink is water. What about you, Oscar?
Everybody, I'm Oscar. So I've actually counted the amount of steps in the stairs up to this office, and that number is 26. So that's a pretty boring fact. All right. And I'm a product designer on Figma. John, what about you?
Hi everybody, I'm John. I'm an engineer at Figma, and my favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla, but I think it's the best one.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing and welcome. Clara, I'm curious, what's a boring fact about yourself?
I loved all the boring facts shared already. Boring fact about me, my favorite sport is walking. And actually the same as Shana, my favorite drink is water. So team water. What about you, Chad?
I wear a lot of black. I'm pretty much always wearing the same thing. It's pretty boring.
Awesome. Well, welcome to our panelists. Hello, everyone. Now that you all are familiar with some of Chad and I's favorite use cases for branching, Chad and I have some questions for the team. And so one of the first questions we want to start with is, how did the idea of branching come to be? Can you sort of take us back to the beginning?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we think a lot about how teams collaborate here at Figma. That's why we've worked on multiplayer. We believe it's really important to the design process and to building products. And so we started to hear, particularly from a lot of larger customers, just larger teams, that they needed a bit more control when they had multiple people working on the same file at the same time. And so this came up as something from design systems teams, for instance, where you have a lot of editors managing a file that needs to be very carefully preserved and make sure that everything's good to go. And so we started exploring this idea of branching. I think branching is definitely something that's been around much longer than Figma, especially in the software world. So we had a lot to learn from there, and a couple good examples to pull on.
Yeah, nice.
I think I'll jump in there a little bit too. I first joined the branching project almost 2 years ago, And at that time, we'd actually been thinking about branching specifically as a feature for a few years before that. But we started to hear, like Shana said, rumblings from our users that now is the right time to really invest in this. But we didn't really have a lot of engineering research done at that point. So one of the first things that I did was spend a lot of time researching, was it even possible? How did other systems do this type of stuff? And trying to figure out how was our path. So that meant a lot of prototypes and talking with some of our users and alpha testers to get some feedback on what our main direction was. And just to give you like an example of why this feature needs a lot of thought. So version control, traditional version control is usually text file to text file, but Figma files have a lot more complicated stuff in there. There's shapes and colors and components, and trying to figure out a good way to wrap those up and make them understandable for people when seeing differences on a branch is really interesting. Consider like a design file that has a dialog box in it. If a designer makes a change to the confirmation button and maybe also the kerning of the text and the drop shadow or the color styles for the overall thing, they might think of that as one change to the dialog box. But under the hood, the computer is like, well, you changed a whole bunch of stuff. So figuring out like good ways to wrap that up into a unit that makes sense to people is just one of the many types of problems that we started researching early on.
Yeah, for sure. And even some of those changes aren't static. Like we saw today, we can't see, prototypes side by side, what those changes might be. And so there's so much to think about there.
Awesome. Now, thinking about branching, right, there's many parallels with development workflows. And, when you think about some of the development side things like cherry picking or, opening pull requests and, on the Figma side, getting into the thought of, well, do you branch at the file level? What if there was branching beyond a file level? I'm curious about the thinking that went into identifying those features and, which of those would be most impactful in a simplified model for design workflows. Wondering, John and Oscar, as you were evaluating, could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I can start. So I think one thing that's really interesting to think about is that version control as like a concept in software engineering has been around for a really long time. Like a very famous early one, RCS, was invented in 1985. So when you think about modern designs or version control systems like Git, they represent decades, 40 plus years of evolution and refinement of the idea of version control for software. So they're really mature systems, but they're also very specialized for software development. So when we were thinking about how to bring those concepts into Figma, which is a design tool, one approach could have been bring the whole kit and caboodle over and implement everything that's in Git, but that's a lot. And it's not totally clear that it would be the best thing for our users, especially because we were hearing from our alpha testers in the early on that there's probably only just a couple key features that are going to be really valuable and help people get the most out of branching. So it's really just a question of a trade-off between what we build now or build later. And we think that the collection of stuff that we put together now is a really good fit for designers to get value from branching.
Yeah, that's huge. And, really a great point on there about, do you put everything in there or do we really listen to the community and, address what works, or what the community really needs the most? Oscar, could you talk a bit more about the designer workflow on the branching side?
Yeah, I mean, when we started thinking about designers using a feature like this, we obviously thought about like what experience do designers have, like with version control, for example. I mean, everyone is probably familiar with like the meme of you just appending like final-final-final to your like file name, and that's a form of version control. But then there's a concept like branching, which probably doesn't really have a good counterpart. And you might not know, maybe you know it from like working with engineering, or maybe you like have done some coding yourself, but otherwise it's pretty new for you. so we thought about that. We thought about like the design process, like what designers typically do, you know, whether it's critiquing each other's work, kind of building on each other's work, user testing, like the design process in general. And kind of summarizing all this, we sort of landed on that it probably shouldn't be like required that you have to make a branch every time, as it is for a lot of like development workflows, and like that it probably shouldn't like add any kind of like complexity to maybe a beginner of Figma as well. So things like that. So we started thinking about, as John mentioned, like what's the kind of the ideal way to introduce these kind of new concepts to the design world basically. Yeah.
Awesome. I love, Oscar, one thing you said there, about branching should be optional, and, thinking about whether you're new to designing in Figma or you've been doing it for a while and now are getting into exploring branching. Like, I love that it's optional. So if you do want to keep working the way you work today, that's totally cool. You can absolutely do that.
I also love his note about naming the file like final, V20. That is a version of, or that's like a type of version control too. And technically you still have the option to do that. And so there's lots of different ways for us to version our files and let other teams know what we're doing. So I know one of the top use cases that was designed for was that of contributing to a design system, which Chad and I briefly touched on earlier. And so I'll direct this next question at one of the designers. Why was this one of the first use cases considered for the feature?
Yeah, I can take that. I think design systems teams just tend to have like, they've hit these pain points first of like needing more control. It's like you tend to have a team that has like multiple people working on this same file that's like very critical to the entire team's workflow. Like all the changes you make to that file need to be published out so that your broader team can use them. And there's often like a form of governance where you have like certain people, usually design systems managers, who want to like oversee all the changes and really make sure that the changes occurring to this file are safe, so that like when you publish something out, it doesn't necessarily break the components that people are already using. And so like, because of all these factors, we heard from like multiple customers that like, while multiplayer was great, it sometimes like got the file into a state where like maybe you're done making your changes to your components, but your team member is still working on theirs. And so it was a little harder to just guarantee that the file itself was in just like a publishable state. And so we've introduced like a couple changes to help with this, like publishing individual components is definitely a change we made too that works well with multiplayer. But branching like gives you this like complete sandbox where you can just like create your branch, which basically duplicates everything in the file. You can like make all your changes safely. Your team member can have their own branch, and then you can name those branches semantically. So you can know that this branch is only about tooltips and the other one is just about buttons, for instance, and then merge them back in, and then like be ready to publish. And so because of that, like we've seen design systems, I think, be just like a key use case of why a team might benefit from using branching.
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to jump in really quick and say, Shana, I really love that explanation. I want to really underscore the idea of the exploratory space for design system files in particular, because these files are so critical. They're really important to organizations, and any change to them has a big ripple effect out to other files and even engineering teams who maybe have implemented those things. The control that's needed is really important, but it also means there's a lot of control. And so branches, I think, are a really neat feature for those teams because it creates a place where you can do exploratory work that you may not necessarily ever even want to merge back in. Or you, of course, can make changes that you want to merge, but it means that the protected space of the main file for the design system stays very protected and you can still have control there. So I think that's a really cool thing that design system maintainers get out of branching that's pretty unique to that type of file.
Yeah, and I think with that being, one of those first use cases, while we had primary use cases in mind for branching, one thing that we've learned from the community is that there are additional ways they're using branching. For example, We've heard how some teams will use it to, really create a frozen point in time for their design work. And then they'll share that with developers, where they'll create a branch design, capture that point in time. Similar to how we showed earlier, but also where maybe they were designing a multiplayer and then created a branch to kind of save that point in time. I'm curious, as this rolled out and even as it was being tested, what were some of the other use cases that we've heard from users?
Yeah, I heard this great one, which I really loved, which was like someone, I think their team member was like presenting a prototype. And then while they were presenting, they realized that they needed to make some changes to this prototype. So they created a branch, like made all their changes safely in the sandbox branch. And then they just like merged it in. And so that meant that the person presenting would never hit a state where things were like work in progress. And it worked really well for just like pushing all those changes directly, which is a really cool use case that's, it was kind of unexpected. It was like really cool to hear about. I think we've also heard people like organizing user tests in branching. So like having a branch for each version that they're testing, and then like whichever one kind of performs the best or they decide is like the winning one is the one they actually merge in. And then they can still like keep those branches if they want to reference them, but they're not like in the official main file. Yeah, so I think like we've heard a lot of different examples that are pretty exciting that aren't necessarily what we had in mind, but are like great use cases of the future.
Yeah, those two are awesome. We love hearing those ones. What else have we heard?
Yeah, so I can, one thing that I think about that I've seen a few times is just generally adding structure to your work and kind of seeing what's ongoing. It's kind of like fundamental and kind of not that like special, but just seeing a list of branches and like, oh, this is ongoing, this is ongoing, and this is ongoing. It's like a really cool, just like way of seeing like the structure. And it could be just like you organizing your personal design work, and we've seen that come up. But it could also be like a design manager or someone like that, just wanting to kind of have a bit more kind of structure in kind of the feature design work. It doesn't have to be design systems. Just knowing what's in progress, what people are working on, what's approved, things like that. So that doesn't have to be that fancy. It could just be like the day-to-day kind of like structure and getting to know what you're working on in the team, basically.
Yeah, and it's super helpful just for visibility, like naming these branches. Those are really critical to be more transparent about some of the changes you're making. And of course, you can always use that in tandem with version history as well. And so we've already explored some of these cases where branching is super powerful and really does make the most sense. But there's also other collaborative features we have, like multiplayer and version history. They can accomplish similar things, and so can y'all walk us through why would a user pick one of those features over the other?
Yeah, so starting to think about multiplayer. I mean, that's a great collaborative feature. We know it, we love it. But maybe like thinking of like collaborating with a developer, for example, or a design colleague. I think for me that's multiplayer is perfect when like we're like in a meeting or maybe in the same room, like together in the file, like talking through something.
Mm-hmm.
Like really kind of like direct communication, like maybe we're like riffing on each other's work, or talking about specific design decisions or whatever. But when collaboration and kind of working with others starts to kind of stretch out over like longer periods of time, like maybe it's like longer kind of like decision processes, or like maybe it's multiple teams involved, and you kind of need a bit more structure compared to just like being in the same file. That's sort of like when you sort of, I see it, you start to move from multiplayer into more like a branching world where you create branches and get that kind of structure. And also like a language to just like talk about, okay, this is proposed, this is in review, this is approved and merged, etc. So kind of get that kind of like structure basically for these more like stretched out kind of collaborative moments. So
yeah, even across
version control as well. I could talk a bit about that.
Yeah,
I think about that mostly for kind of sort of like a backup, like being able to go back in time, and branching almost like going to the future. Like what do we kind of like creating a branch? What are we working on? And so it's almost like that kind of like continuum. Yeah.
Yeah, I like, you know, even tying into what you're saying a little on the last one, Oscar, where, you know, even if it's used for the day to day and having those branch names, you know, even if you don't end up moving forward with it, you know, you're still moving forward with an exploration, but maybe you archive that branch and you come back to it a month later and, you know, just restore that branch and pick right back up where you left off. You know, I think that you get a little bit more flexibility there by using branching versus going into version history and going back and restoring from a point in the past. You know, you're a little limited on going forward. Then you got to take that step back to go forward. Whereas with branching, you could just pick right back up the pieces that you want, correct?
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah.
And then you also mentioned it's great for if you're not in the same room at the same time and those processes are longer, but also if the like physical distance is longer, you know, you're about to finish your workday and then 12 hours later, you're waiting for your teammate to also contribute. So not just physical distance, but like, you know, the actual time it takes to accomplish that part of the process. Those are, yeah, great uses for that.
Yeah. Speaking of uses, I think it'd be really interesting if we could share, you know, could each of you give us a look behind the scenes? You know, how are you using branching in the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely use it for our internal design system. So kind of just like creating a branch to make changes to improve components, tagging a reviewer to like take a look at it before it gets merged in and published. I also really like using branches for our design crits or like design critiques. So like when we meet for crit, like I'll create a branch for the work I want feedback on, and people will kind of like leave their feedback in the branch itself. It's kind of like then separate from like my main file where I'm keeping track of like what's officially going to be built for various projects. And so after the feedback, you can like iterate on it, merge it back in if you want. And I think that's been working really well. We use it in conjunction with multiplayer. So it's like we're all in the branch together, like looking at the work when we meet for crit.
I love that one.
You were saying that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Oh, I just said I love that use case for the design crit.
Yeah, I was going to ask real quick on that, Shana. You mentioned sometimes it gets merged. You know, how often do those branches get archived? You know, how often do you revisit some of those ideas?
Yeah, I think it depends on the designer and the project, and it's nice that it's kind of flexible and there's different options. So oftentimes I'll just kind of like iterate in the same branch. And then when I'm happy with kind of like working through all the feedback I've gotten from crit, like then I'll merge it in. But I think we also have team members who like prefer to just like kind of like leave the branches separately so they can reference back to that point in time, which is kind of similar to that use case you called out of like kind of freezing a file for developers or just like, yeah, just like having a branch to reference back to for a project at a certain point in time.
Awesome. Oscar, how about you? How are you using branching?
Yeah, the main thing I think about, apart from our design system, that's really cool, by the way, just seeing like a branch for each kind of like addition to our design system. That's, I think it just adds a really cool level of transparency about what's ongoing. So that's been a kind of huge change actually. But the other thing is just riffing on each other's work, I think. I mean, we constantly share links with each other. Like we have like one Slack channel where every designer on the team basically just posts what they're working on every day, and sharing the link, of course. What you end up doing, like if you want to kind of like make like propose a change or like try out some idea on someone else's file, is you open the file obviously, but maybe you don't want to kind of just jump in and kind of make a mess of the other person's work. And I mean, maybe that's fine if you just like want to draw a new icon that you want to try out or whatever. But what if you want to make a change to a prototype or like try out the whole new flow for something, or maybe make like or riff on something that's a bit more kind of structural? Then I think it's really, really cool to be able to create a branch, and having that option has been really helpful a few times. And it's not like creating these like one-off files that just gets like you lose the link and you don't know where that ended up. And you don't have to add another page either, because that's one level of like clutter in the other person's file. So it's been a really cool option for those types of kind of riffing on each other's work, basically, just in the day-to-day.
Yeah, I like that casual approach where on one hand you can, casually riff, share your ideas. It's not as formal, but then there is that other side where this is part of like, design system contribution. This is a little bit more formalized in how you name things. And so there's a spectrum that you can approach branching with, which I think is cool. So before we switch over to Q&A, can someone on the team tell us what the team is thinking about next in terms of branching? This is actually already a question in our Q&A, so we can just cue that up.
Yeah, I can try to give some detail here. So I mean, the main thing for the team right now is that we just launched the feature. Tons of people are trying it out, and we're really kind of like in a listening mode right now, trying to understand how this is being kind of used by people and what's working, what's maybe working less well. So we're really listening to the community. We're trying to talk to teams and see how it's working for people. So that's the biggest thing for us, is that like we don't want to kind of like, this is the thing we're going to work on now, but actually like it's a really kind of new thing, and we want to be really open to how it's landing and how people start using it. I mean, we're pretty much like every week we're seeing like a new use case, and we're sort of like keeping track of like, oh, people are using it for this, people are using it for that. Like what should we actually like think about the most going ahead when we look at this feature. But maybe to like give some kind of general areas, like we're definitely thinking about the kind of the collaborative aspect. Like you create a review, and that sort of style of kind of communicating. We're thinking about like commenting as well. But we're also looking like at like as kind of John mentioned in the beginning, like how does branching and merging work on kind of a file technical level? Like what can we do there to kind of optimize or improve the experience? One thing that's on my mind as well is like, okay, we launched branching as kind of a you access it in the file menu for every file, and it's kind of like always there if you need it. But do we maybe need to make it more accessible at some point, or maybe integrate it into more parts of Figma and maybe make it a bit more kind of present? I guess that really depends on how kind of it's getting adopted and how teams are kind of starting to use it for their kind of everyday processes. But yeah, we're really kind of listening to how it's being picked up by teams and what people are saying. So post in the forums, and we'll definitely keep track of what people are like needing of this feature, basically. So
yeah, that's great to hear. And just to plus one, the comment about the forum, our product teams are definitely always reading those. And so if you have ideas, make sure to upvote and comment over there. So we're now going to transition over to a time of Q&A. We're reading through some of your questions. If you haven't already dropped in a question, feel free to click on that Q&A button in Zoom. Chad, what are some questions we want to bring out? There's so many. Thank you all for leaving them.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And even one thing that I would love to say, I think Oscar really summed up when he said, we're really in listening mode right now. Even seeing a lot of your questions coming in, definitely share some of your thoughts on forum.figma.com. I see, as I'm taking a look here, a lot of the questions in here are about some of those pieces like, hey, it would make our workflow easier if, so definitely share those ideas. A very common one I'm seeing, and I'm curious if someone on the team would want to talk about, maybe why we don't have this right now, is a lot of asks about what if I'm making changes to a library file in a branch and I'm not able to publish from a branch. I know we talked about, simplifying the experience and, kind of what comes first, considerations for later. Wondering if anyone has any thoughts, or did that come up as a thought as we were building this out?
I can take a stab at it.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an intriguing workflow, and we have heard many requests for it. So you're right to be asking about how that could work. But it's actually really complicated, and I'm sure some of the designers can have some good answers here. But like the idea of publishing from the branch, when you've published from the branch and then you merge the branch, what happens to all those files that consumed that thing that was published from the branch? So some of the workflows get a little sticky, and we decided to focus on the ones that we felt would have immediate value right away. And I think this one needs a lot of thought to get right. So I think that's probably what I'm going to say. And Shana and Oscar, feel free to jump in if you've got some more flavor.
Yeah, I think like we've been focusing on just like a really simple, accessible way to introduce branching into Figma, and particularly focusing on use cases where you want to make some changes to the main file and like pretty like concrete changes, like short-lived changes, instead of having like necessarily like a really long-lived branch that might have its own life and need to like impact multiple files down the line too. And like John says, it does get a bit tricky, I think, with some of the cases of like the behind the scenes of exactly how we keep track of like what the changes are. So we want to make sure that whatever we build works not just for like works well for everyone in all the cases that are possible. But definitely always looking to hear feedback about how you think branching could fit into your workflows, and how you could see your team using it in the future.
Yeah. Another great question here. And Clara, maybe you could show this one since you're sharing. I've seen two questions in here about how folks are able to see all branches of a file and any statuses for them. Wondering if we could show an example of that and how folks can see that.
Yeah, so right now there are no branches on this one. Let's see if I can find one. So a quick tip, a way for you to know if there are branches right off the bat on a file is you'll see this little pill at the top left. And right now you'll see that the preview of it is showing the preview of main. But if you're wanting to see all the branches, you'll see some folks created their own space. It's now going to show you a preview of that branch. So if I jump into it, I'm right into the branch now. If I head back into the main file, there is an option for me to see all the branches. I can either hit the two branches here, and then another way to access that in the dropdown is to see all branches. So both in the file, there's a modal option, and then on the file browser view, you can also see a list of those as well. Yeah, good question.
And I think another part of that is helpful too, is even when you have merged a branch or archived it, it will also show you that flag as well. So you can always see any of the archive. You can see if it was a change that was merged in, or if it was an exploration that you shelved. Here we can see I've shelved a lot of ideas in here where just start to explore things and archive those. But you're always able to see those. I think one thing is helpful to share on this too is if you have a branch you've archived, we talked a little bit about picking work back up. If it has not been merged, you just archived it, can put it on that shelf to come back to later. You can always open that branch. If you're an editor, you're able to restore that as well. And you can just pick right back up with that.
Yeah, and one more quick note is in the version history, we're also going to capture every time a branch is created. We're going to capture right before the merge. So just in case you regret the merge, you can always hit that point again. And then we're going to capture when it was merged and by whom. So version history will capture some of these actions as well.
Let's see. I think another question here that there's a couple that allude to this. Do all changes made within a branch have to be merged, or can some be deselected or denied?
Yeah, I could try talking about this a little bit. I mean, this is definitely a request we've seen pop up a few times. And yeah, I think we're really seeing this being requested by people. So I think the team will look at it. But yeah, I guess it comes down to kind of the review experience. Like, what does an approve mean? Like, what if you, and who kind of gets to select what's being merged? So I think we'll definitely look at some of the kind of the team aspects, like who's doing what. If we are to look at this, and yeah, I mean, this is like one of those things that, or when looking at the review generally, that there's so much complexity in kind of the traditional kind of version control tools that we just like, we wanted to land on kind of a sweet spot where people can kind of like get to know what branching is on kind of a basic level, and then there are like so much things like this that we can add going ahead. But yeah, it's definitely a feature request we've seen. So
yeah, and I think that while everything is merged in, I think it's a great opportunity for conversation, right? So if you're a reviewer and there's certain things that maybe hey, this needs further exploration, don't want to merge everything else in, I think it's a great opportunity to have that conversation, be able to reach out to the person who had requested the review, just have that conversation. You can always revert the review back to a working draft, so that way you can continue working on that as well. So yeah.
Seeing one question here. It says, say you created a branch to explore different UI layouts of the same screen, and you only want to merge the best option you came up with rather than all of the explorations. Is that doable using branching?
I think that's basically the same question as the last one. And like what I can like say more here is that thinking about these types of feature, like, okay, we've done a bunch of changes, like which one should we merge? I think what a lot of people love about Figma, what we love about Figma, is that you're like, you have this kind of infinite canvas, you're on the canvas, you're like managing things there. And if we would kind of like sort of recreate that kind of managing experience in the sort of review view, how do we make it as like as nice and easy to use as managing like your file on the canvas that you already do today? So we wouldn't want to kind of like make a lesser experience, but and sort of have you do it in a UI, I think, necessarily. So but yeah, that's like just some thoughts on that. But I think that's basically the same request or like the same discussion point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then you can almost, like, I guess a way I would approach it, I would create a branch for my overall sandbox, not necessarily wanting to merge everything in. And then I might go back to the main file and then create a very intentional branch about what exactly I want merged back in. So I would create a second branch and then copy what was in the first overall sandbox branch and then paste that in to merge it in. That's sort of like the flow in my head, how I would approach that. And so maybe that's something worth exploring too.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we probably have time for about one more question here. There's one I saw here that I think would be a good one, a little different. Question, are branches, or being able to, I'm assuming being able to access branches, is that available via the Figma API? So it can be included in this particular case, backup routines, or maybe you want to build a plugin around branches. Is that available via the API?
I can answer that. Branches are exposed in the REST API a little bit. We're going to get a little technical here. Sorry for people who are not super into APIs, but there is a parameter that you can add to the get files endpoint that will return all the branches for a file if it has those branches. And since a branch is just a regular file with a file key, then you can get access to the file that way. We definitely are interested in people's workflows, though, about APIs and things that you would like to be doing with APIs, because we haven't invested too much in that part yet. So if you have cool ideas about that, we would love to hear about them in the forum or through support.
Awesome. All right, well, everyone, that takes us to time today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you all got as much out of this as we did. And if you missed some of the templates we shared or some of the resources mentioned, have no fear. We will include all of them and this recording as a follow-up email shortly. And to check out more Figma live streams, go ahead and you can head to figma.com/events. And if you have ideas or suggestions on topics that you would love to hear more about, we're always available at community@figma.com. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. And we will see you next time.
Thanks all. Have a good one. Bye.